Today's episode is entitled It's So Funny We Don't Talk Anymore, which of course is referencing the words from the Cliff Richard song. And basically I'm going to talk about the matter of talking, personal communication, language and speaking to people. My thoughts on this and where we're up to was sort of peaked a little while ago. There was a person that I'd obviously developed, or they had developed an issue with me, and there were some ongoing matters. So I thought the relevant thing to do was to talk to the person directly and try and sort the matter out, adult to adult. And having this conversation, part of the way through, the person said to me, "I'm really uncomfortable with this conversation, can you please leave?" And it just got me wondering to where we're up to now in conversations, where we're up to in actually speaking to people, where it comes to a place that we are no longer able to have hard conversations with people, talking directly to them, which is really interesting because language is one of the fundamental parts of being human. Evolutionary wise, we lived in groups, we worked together, we were a community, and one of the important things we had to do was to communicate with each other. And the main way of doing this was through language and through speaking. And we have seen this over the world where in every part of the world groups have developed language, even within language, regional dialects. They have developed ways of speaking to one another. Our brain has specific language area, so there's an area dedicated to language, and in fact there's two parts that goes on. There's the part of our brain that interprets words and decides which words we want to say, and then there's another part of the brain that then sends out the program basically to our mouth to enable us to speak those words. So it is a very important part of us, and brain developed to speaking and talking. Strange enough, what we don't have is a dedicated reading and writing area of the brain. Reading and writing is a more complex skill that involves many areas of the brain having to work together at the same time. And this can be shown on types of brain scan imaging that shows which areas of the brain are active when we're doing certain tasks. With language and speaking, it's more localized. Reading and writing is far more widespread and a lot more areas are involved. And this goes to the fact that language is an innate ability, it's an innate part of who we are. So language came first, and we have seen that writing came later. We had in various forms, hieroglyphics and pictographs, basically a form of writing that told a story. And then we've later developed the form of writing and reading we know now, which is words using letters as symbols to represent what we say. But for the most time, we have relied on speaking to one another. We've been in close proximity, and communication has been a very direct thing. We didn't have much way to communicate over a distance, and that eventually came with, we've had smoke signals and carrier pigeons, semaphore signals, flashing lights. So even back a while ago, people tried to develop a way of communicating over a distance, but it was very rudimentary and very basic. It still didn't have the subtleties of language. One of the most important things that differentiates speaking from other forms of communication is that only a small percentage of the meaning of the communication is the actual words. So much of the meaning of what we're saying comes through how we say it, the tone, the intonation, can even be the gestures, the body language that accompanies the words that we say. One of the great little short sentences that shows this up is a little sentence, "You know your shit." Now, This can either be said as a complimentary thing, you know you're shit, or it can be said as a derogatory phrase, you know you're shit. Same words, when we hear them, written they are a little bit different, but depending on how we say them, the context, the language, the intonation, it can convey one of two meanings. Communication is a really interesting thing in that how the process of communication occurs. So basically it starts off, we have the idea of what I want to say to you. So I have that idea. That then runs through my brain and all the filter of my life experiences and the words I know, what I've done before, and running through that filter, the output is then the words that I choose to say to you and how I choose to say them. You then hear those words and look at the person, and all that information for that message comes through. It then runs through your filter of your brain, of your past experience, and then you interpret it in your way. Now, the fact that there's sort of two filters going through here means that what I intended to say to you and what the message I wanted you to receive may not be what you interpret, and this is often the basis of misunderstanding. I know what I wanted to say and what I wanted to say to you, what I wanted to communicate to you, but that didn't necessarily come across. So there is a lot of subtlety in communication. But through skill and through time, we do learn this. And it's one of our great things that we communicate and speak things. One of the greatest, was listed as one of the greatest writers, is William Shakespeare and his plays. But the important thing about Shakespeare's plays is they were meant to be performed, they were meant to be spoken, not meant to be read. And that opens a whole new world of interpretation in the performer and how he speaks those words, how he conveys that message to us. So that part is really important. So for a long time, that was our form of communication. It was direct, it was personal, we spoke to people. We had forms then of writing letters once we had writing, and letter writing became an important thing. And in letter writing, we can now communicate with people over a distance that weren't directly in our presence. And letters were written often telling a story. So if we were speaking them, and I think most people, if they read a letter, the little voice in their head is reading that letter aloud. So it is speaking to them. But one of the problems is it is words, and a lot of that intonation and that meaning, a lot of those cues as to what these words mean gets taken away. So it's a lot more open to interpretation, letters and reading, versus someone speaking to us directly. One of the parts of being social, though, is also sitting down and having discussions of ideas. There's an immediacy and interplay that doesn't come with other forms of communication. And one of the great things it used to be was the great idea of having the deep and meaningful conversations, sitting around with friends, maybe at a sleepover or staying up late one night when you're younger, possibly sometimes when you're out on a weekend, or maybe camping somewhere and had a few drinks, and that time of the night would come, we'd have the deep and meaningful conversations, and we would discuss things and open up with people and share and really get into things and get things going back and forwards. It's really, enhanced the experience of both people. And I'm sort of worried that is sort of something we are losing. That skill to have the deep and meaningful conversation, that wanting to engage in those conversations, engage in those discussions on a personal level. Technology, this is quite interesting, brought us the telephone. And the telephone was an amazing device that now we had a method to speak to someone that we couldn't see. They weren't in the room, they weren't there, they could be hundreds, thousands of kilometres away. We could speak to this person and we could hear them. So it had a benefit over letters, that we had that advantage of hearing the voice, the intonation, the subtleties of messaging, that warmth that comes through, that familiarity with the voice, and that immediacy that we could have a discussion. And this was an absolutely wonderful thing to have, this telephone, this device of being able to speak to someone remotely. And for a long time that was a part, and it's interesting to see where now our telephone is often used not to speak to people. In fact, we'll go by text messages or a lot of written messaging. And it's taken away that immediacy, that personal contact, that discussion, and that skill of discussion that we've had for so long. And it's now also a case of being a great way to avoid having hard discussions or having to front up the person and say something to them. We'll now just send them a text. I think the classic one is boyfriend, girlfriend, the breakup is announced by a text message to someone, or someone is being let go from their job. They'll now get a text message. It won't be the boss calling them into the office and telling them, "I'm sorry, I'm letting you go." That we have taken this easy way out to avoid having a hard conversation with a person by just sending a text. And I think this has the effect of reducing some of our resilience, our ability to have these hard conversations, which are really so necessary, important for us to be able to have a hard conversation, because hard times will turn up in our lives, hard situations will arrive, and they will involve needing to have a difficult conversation. And this is a skill that I believe we are losing, or we're becoming afraid of, which was shown in the comments made by this person who expressed his discomfort at having a difficult, hard conversation. He was now uncomfortable having it. It's just a case of, how have we got here? How has now one of our fundamental parts of being a human, being a person, now become something we are uncomfortable dealing with? Language has often been something that identifies us as well. We'll look through the regions, and various countries have their languages, their own languages, which they're very proud of, and it's become something that has identified them. And then there was regional dialects that identified as you came from that sort of area. Now, to a part, they were exclusionary. If you didn't know the dialect, you couldn't speak, so it put you as someone who wasn't from there and identified possibly friend or foe. But it was also inclusive. If you spoke that language, the lingua franca, you were part of that group. So it was a very inclusive thing. And that is something we still look at now. And there's a lot of words that are the trending words. That's what's the cool thing or the in thing to say. That by using the right words, the right jingoism, it identifies, I know what I'm saying, I'm part of this group. And it becomes part of our identity. So language has become a really important part of us, our choice of words, the words we use for it, as saying I'm a part of this group because I know how to speak the same language they speak. And this may be any situation from sport. If you know what certain things mean in a certain sport, I think basketball in particular has so many words and jargon associated with it. If you know all the jargon, yes, you're a proper basketball person. We face this sometimes in the gym. There's sort of words and phrases that if you're in the fitness and gym crew, you know what these words and phrases are. But if you come from outside that area, you may not know what it means. And it's part of the thing to learn these phrases so you can fit in. So language has often been a part of deciding who fits in, who's part of your group, which goes back to our prehistoric days where we did operate in rather smallish groups, and it was a security thing, who's one of us, and language was an identifier. But language is one of the most, the beautiful things that want to communicate, and it's just a shame that talking, communicating, discussing hard ideas may be the skill that's on the way out for it, that we're not losing it. We're not using it, sorry, and we are losing that facility because we've gone to so much written word and text for it. One of the interesting developments that comes on now, obviously, is the AI, the chat GPT, using artificial intelligence to sort of chat to us and to create language. Anyone who has used those will know it's still a bit clunky. It's not good on subtlety and often can't pick up the question that you want. But it's interesting, we're now using an artificial intelligence to generate chat, to generate conversation, and we'll now be faced with this new experience of having conversations, at the moment mostly by text, with something that's not human. It's artificial, and I'm sure in time this will change a lot more to discussions. Those of you who are probably used to asking Siri a question at the moment or Google a question have experienced this at a very basic level, where you now start a very basic conversation, usually a simple question response from a machine, and you get a voice coming back at you. But this is likely to evolve further, and it's going to be really interesting to see, are people going to get involved in artificial intelligence discussions? Are these chat BTs maybe going to replace discussions with our friends? We'll feel safer having chat with an AI, with a chatbot. Will we have people who may be socially anxious, have anxiety, social issues, loneliness, who now use or will in the future be talking to an AI, and it will be talking back and having these discussions? So things that we have done with people, will now be doing it again, but we'll be doing it with robot, a computer, some form of AI. So it's really a case of, an interesting part of the wheel turning back towards conversations. But will those conversations have the same depth, the same meaning? Will it be able to convey the same communication? Will we have the same attachment to a computer that we can have to a person? What will the quality of the discussion be? Can AI be empathic? Can it convey sympathy? Will the tone be right to do all those things that a person does at the moment? And this is a lot of what we lose by going to written communication, by texting someone rather than actually speaking to them, phoning them up, particularly in the hard times, and expressing sympathy, empathy with a person. When a person needs some support and reaching out, discussing with someone, the presence of someone when you're talking to them is so different to there being someone at the end of the line, someone being on the other side of a computer screen. It's an indictment of society. We have to have things like Lifeline and Kids Lifeline, and counselling service, that we need just a basic service. When someone needs to speak to someone, they have to phone a service. They don't have someone to speak to. Now that may speak to their social situation. It may also speak to their inability to have these conversations directly with someone, the fact they don't feel confident, or they don't have other people who they'd feel confident in talking to. Other people don't have the skills in talking to them. There's a whole lot of reasons, but one of the parts is they need to talk to someone. So they ring a helpline and they speak to someone. And that really underscores some of the importance of where talking and communication is in our lives. And there's a saying that whilst we're more connected and communicate more, we're actually saying less. So we may communicate at a very superficial level with a whole lot more people than we used to, but on a real meaningful, deep, authentic level, how many people do we genuinely talk to, have genuine conversations with, have genuine feelings for. These feelings are developed through being with people and through talking to them. And I don't think we get quite as much through chats and the feeling of it and just writing and texting and messaging. The interpersonal communication is what we are, and we've now sort of devolved our communication to be so non-personal. Will our chat GPT and our AI fill that void? An interesting void we've created. It will simulate a personal contact. I don't know. It's going to certainly be interesting to see where that one goes. But I really like to see a return to the days when we talk to people, we discuss people, we discuss matters with people, we do it directly, we speak to them. We aren't afraid of it. We have the strength in ourselves to do it. We have the skill to do it. It once again becomes the norm. This is what you do. There's an issue, you talk, you discuss. We talk to our friend. We are happy to have a deep, meaningful conversation. We are there for them via talk, via being there, by doing it personally, by doing it face to face. A second example of where this failed, obviously in the recent circumstances, where we found people who were happy to talk about me behind my back, but the same people really did not want to talk to me. In fact, they're quite certain, I do not want to talk to you. And a case of, well, say what you're saying behind my back to my face, and they wouldn't do it. Which belies a sort of belief I have. You don't say behind someone's back something you're not prepared to say to their face. And that seems to have been a quality, a value that seems to have been lost. And particularly with social media, where it's really easy to spread a message and spread stuff around people. And we can happily talk or message or communicate about people behind their back much more readily than we could before. And we don't have that bit of integrity that says I should say this to the person's face for it. And I think that's a generational change. It has been an interesting thing to see from younger people to what I expected on how we dealt with problems. And the fact that you'll refuse to say something to someone, that you no longer can speak to a person, you no longer make your point to that person, or you don't get to meet your accuser face to face and hear them and respond to it. So there's a great thing going on in the world called the SETI project, SETI, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It is basically monitoring the skies to try and find signs of some communication from another planet. It's so impossible. We've been doing it for a really long time, and there's money being spent, which has so far found nothing. And we are also sending communication signals, beaming radio signals where we think might be likely targets, to receive them where we hope there may be some life out there. So we're both at a planetary level. This pale blue dot, this speck of dust in the universe, is trying to communicate with someone out there. We just so want someone else to be out there at a planetary humanity level to talk to. This search for communication and signals from extraterrestrial bodies really took off in the 1890s, actually, by Nikola Tesla. And he had an idea to this newfangled radio contraption we had to try and detect signals from Mars. We so wanted our close neighbour Mars to have life. We wanted someone to speak to communicate with, and we just wanted Mars to be it, which at a planetary level is a wonderful thing, and it speaks to our desire and our need to communicate with others. And so far we have found no one. We've received nothing for it, no signals come back, which from the scale of distance is not unreasonable. It could take so long for a message from another planet, even by radio, to come here, that we may get it far too late. It may just, never get to us because it's aimed at the wrong space. The universe is so huge. Who would pick this little speck over here to send a radio signal to communicate with? It is just so highly improbable that would happen. But we still want it to be. We still want to have that other person to communicate with. We want to talk to someone else and know there is someone else out there. And that is such a wonderful reflection on where we are in our humanity, that we do want to talk. But coming down on the global level and down to the individual level, we can be so afraid of talking, of discussing, and not wanting to communicate. And so many problems have come around through just avoiding communication. So my point would be, instead of texting people, instead of communicating with our written word, we talk to people, get involved in actually talking to people. Have those hard discussions. Build your resilience, your ability to have hard discussions by having them. Don't be afraid of them. The more you avoid hard discussions, hard conversations, talking matters through, the harder it will be to do so when it comes time and it really needs to happen. I really encourage you to talk to more people, communicate more via talking, make communication more personal. Really involve your skill of talking and listening, understanding what the other person is saying. I'm, in this case, sit here and basically I have a camera sitting there, and that's who I'm talking to in many ways. I'm talking to you, I'm talking to the camera, though. It's a time shift, it's not direct, we can't get anything coming through, you can't come and have your response to me. That being said, I always love to get responses and hear your thoughts on matters for it, and it may be a slow written conversation, but do leave any comments where you can behind, or feel free to reach out and contact. As I say, try and start a conversation, start an actually discussion on this. Let's talk about this, talk to other people. Spend more time talking, and quality talk for it, refining our message, refining our listening ability. This is what I want you to do. This is what I think we need to do. Listen better, communicate better, learn how to talk better, and convey those subtle messages, that emotional message, get those better emotional and personal connections with people again. It's just talking to someone is the greatest way to make a connection. And if you're one of those lonely people out there, pick a random stranger to have a talk to. I saw there is a city that has these red benches in it. The feature of the red bench, if you feel lonely and want someone to talk to, you sit on the red bench. And if you see someone sitting on the red bench, that's an invitation to come and sit and talk to that person. You think, isn't that a wonderful idea? It deals with loneliness, but it also, again, reinforces the greatness and our need for being involved in talking directly and conversation and all that goes with it. So, talk to those people. Don't be afraid. Don't look down your nose. Some of the most wonderful people are yet to be discovered by you. A little bit more talking would be wonderful. Elvis Presley always complained about a little less conversation. I think there's a need for a bit more conversation. So talk to someone today. So instead of texting, try talking. Connect and communicate. The next podcast sort of goes on from our communication theme, and it's entitled Gossip Girls, and it looks at the world of allegation, gossip and rumour for it. So make sure you stay tuned and follow up that one. Until next time, take care, be good to everybody.